Okay, here we go. We came to hijack your brain. We came to hijack your brain. We say what we like and have a blast. Something. You are listening to something. Something. Okay, here we go.
Welcome, everybody. It is time yet again for another episode of the Something Cast.
Something Cast.
I'm James Hatton.
I'm Podcast Rob.
And, sup, sir? How are you?
Not bad. Jeez, it feels like we were just here 2 weeks ago.
I know. We were almost on a regular schedule for a little while there.
Seriously. You know, I had an epiphany the other day.
You should get that checked out.
Yeah, I know. I got to renew my my prescription. Did you know that in a mere 5 months from now, we will have been doing the show for 5 years?
Oh my God, is it really like Jiminy Crickets?
Yeah. That was like a psychic brick wall that I hit when I realized that. I was like, holy Christ.
And thanks for saving it till we were on the air for you to tell me, because now I'm going to just sit here agape for a minute.
Yeah, thinking I have done nothing with my life for 5 years.
How far
Jesus.
I've not gone.
Whew.
So this episode in particular is one we've been trying to get done for a little while.
It is. We've had some scheduling stuff come up,
including
but
my
that's all
blown-out
taken
voice.
care of.
Yeah, we were going to record a couple days ago, but I happened to go to Philly, see some Shinsuke Nakamura, and came home sounding like this. So it's probably better to hold off a couple days, but I am back. At least I'm still a little froggy, but...
You know, a professional podcaster wouldn't choose wrestling over his own podcast.
I paid enough for the seats, the podcast can wait.
And to go to Philadelphia, no less.
Yeah, well, that was...
God.
You know, there was
especially with them being in the Super Bowl. I mean, it's not like they're not already arrogant.
Oh, and trust me, if I didn't know they were in the Super Bowl, Philly let me know they were in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And Philly, I believe, was the most Philly thing they did was during the Women's Royal Rumble, which was the first ever one. They
threw snowballs at them.
Yeah.
They beat Santa Claus to death.
Yes. Just randomly pulled him out. By the way, remember this?
He'll never expect it. It's almost February.
They kept chanting the men's names for the associated female wrestler. So, you know, Nikki Bella would come out and they would chant John Cena sucks. Michelle McCool, who is Undertaker's girlfriend, would come out and they'd chant Undertaker. And you're like, guys, damn it, this is the most Philly thing you could possibly do.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope people understood and heard the voice, the dulcet tones that are the third mic tonight.
Is it me?
Mr. Tim Stevens, once again gracing us with his presence.
Bum, 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 bum,
Here I am.
bum. And
For you, the fans, all of you out there, I do this for you.
Now, I know before we usually record our episodes, James plugs our sponsor for suitable tie-in with what we're talking about. Is there anything you have on the docket for our sponsor?
Well, if you were to go to audibletrial.com/something, you can get 30 days of all of the membership crap that you would get if you just went there and were a member monthly. I should probably say that a whole lot nicer.
A little bit, I would think, maybe.
If you go to audibletrial.com/something, you will get 30 days. That is correct. 30 days and one free. That is automatically free. Audiobook of your choosing. And since we are doing an episode about the fine featured comics that we know and love, you could go and get yourself a book such as, holy crap, how come the website won't load quick enough?
I am not familiar with that title.
Well, it's
an
a
unusual choice.
Who draws that title?
It's a hoot, let me tell you. You could get a book such as, good God, typing as fast as I can, The Amazing, Fantastic, Incredible, A Marvelous Memoir by Stan Lee, Peter David, Colleen Duran, narrated by Stan Lee himself and Peter Regard. You could get Stan Lee, the man behind the Marvel, by Bob Batchelor, narrated by Kevin T. Collins. And we'll type in one more keyword here. Marvel's Black Widow, for example, forever read by Margaret Stoll, narrated by Julia Whalen of the Black Widow novels. That could be yours if you go to audibletrial.com/something and type in, I don't know, comic book or Marvel. I only found war books when I typed in the title of the show we're discussing, so not that one so much. But
I would snatch up the one narrated by Stan Lee himself, because I mean he's like 147,
95, but close enough.
So
give or take. But because we have the brilliant, fantastic, and encyclopedic knowledges of Mr. Tim Stevens, we are yet again going into the buzzbin of Marvel television.
Before we get there, James, I have a surprise for you.
Oh, shit.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
No, we're not doing another Hatton episode.
Oh, thank God.
Not yet, at least. Did you know that as of this recording, we have a new sponsor?
What?
We are sponsored today in part by Quixotic Games, developer and publisher of Dungeon Alliance. Dungeon Alliance is a 1-to-4 player deck-building dungeon crawl that lets you draft your own team of 4 heroes, build your own deck, and attempt to conquer the ever-changing dungeon that the game comes with. Dungeon Alliance has rules for not only competitive and cooperative, but also solo play. Can be found in mid-February 2018 in all fine hobby shops and online as well. If you want to check it out, check out Dungeon Alliance and the other great games from Quixotic Games at quixoticgames.com. That's QUIXOTICGAMES.com.
And if I may say, if you are interested, make sure to talk to your retailer to see if they can get copies in.
Absolutely.
That's fantastic.
I saw the unboxing video. It's really awesome looking. There's a lot of games out there that are kind of like dungeon crawl games where you move your figures, you flip your cards over, you find your treasure. But the fact that you can make one dungeon and have multiple teams of 4 heroes, each run by different players, all in the same dungeon.
Oh, that's fun.
It's a really awesome twist on it, yeah.
How long do you know what playtime looks like on those? It sounds like a lengthier one, which is great. I love a lengthy board game.
It depends, because the solo play one can happen really quick.
Oh, okay. Sure.
So you control your player, and then you control the monsters too. Control in a... It's not free control, because you're just like, oh, I'm going to make all the monsters run away from my heroes, and all of my heroes will just go in and pick up all the money. But there are rules to play it solo, to play it against or with multiple players. It's really sweet. The figures look awesome. Quixoticgames.com. Check them out. BoardGameGeek.com also has an unboxing video and some playthrough videos. So it's a really sweet game, and they're really great guys. So check them out if that's your thing.
Yep. And I'm sure you'll be hearing more about that in the coming months from us. So,
yep.
Awesome. That was a wonderful surprise. Thank you.
It was.
I love when people love us to love them and spread that love.
Okay. Yeah. Wow.
It's true. That's the way it works. The
flow chart that happened in my brain listening to you say that was all right.
I started the sentence and realized I had to finish it, and it just continued in a cyclical fashion. So we have,
but. Yes. As you said before, we have Mr. Tim Stevens with us, and we are talking about, I believe it's the latest Marvel TV show to be found on Netflix.
That is correct.
They breed like lemmings at this point, so one never knows.
Do lemmings breed quickly?
I would assume so. They're sort of... I'm just going to assume so because they're cute and adorable like a bunny.
Oh, okay. And you didn't want to say the cliche of bunny, so you went with lemming?
Yes.
Oh, fair enough.
We'll go with that.
Yet, unlike Lemmings, this show really kind of went in its own direction.
Yeah. Very
you know
similar
that
to
the lemmings jumping over the cliff thing is actually a myth, right?
You have never played the video game, sir.
Oh no.
I have, actually. Where you build the stairs or blow them up and stuff. I remember that game.
Yes, and they all follow each other off the cliff.
Yep. Yeah.
My favorite.
But
Go ahead,
the
please.
documentary that comes from was staged by, I believe it was the Disney company.
It was
making
Disney
at the time, and they forced them over the hill to get that shot. And from there, people assume that's what lemmings do, when they in fact do not.
When it was really just this, like a stage producer throwing lemmings off a cliff.
Basically, yeah. And everyone says that Disney's just this, family company. They don't know how hardcore they are.
No, especially
They will
Clearly
throw
they-
furry animals off the top of a cliff if they have to.
Clearly, they have not seen these Stan Lee versus Jim Henson versus Walt Disney epic rap battles of history, or they
Right.
would know better.
So we are hitting the Punisher, which I will say, I was hesitant going in because I'm not a very Punisher-y guy. I've read a little bit of the Ennis stuff, which I know is very good, but Ennis is sort of a small beloved slice of the big Punisher mythos, which was always read by people who I didn't talk too much about comics. Because they usually just read Punisher, Venom, Silver Surfer, and Wolverine, and didn't read anything else.
Yeah.
You know the breed I'm talking about.
Yeah, there's definitely a type.
So I went in hesitant. Where did you guys come in from?
I had read a little bit of the Mike Zeck run of The Punisher when he was doing the artwork for it, which was fantastic. I wasn't like a huge Punisher guy. I was more in it for a lot of the art that Zeck was doing at the time. So as much as I hate to say it, most of what I knew about The Punisher was from the two movies and minor comic background. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have a whole lot of deep dive detail going into this series. And I got to tell you, I actually really liked that because there were some things that happened in this show that I'm sure comic book readers knew was coming down the pipe based on certain things that happened. But for my viewing, when they happened, it was more like, what? And it was, I had a really cool experience watching this.
What about you, Mr. Tim?
Well, I think we've talked about briefly in the past that I'm just not a particularly big Punisher fan either. However, I really like John Barenthal's performance as Punisher in Daredevil, so I was excited for it from that perspective. But I guess sort of an apprehension is a fair way to characterize it. The in fact 3 Punisher movies have been different degrees of not very good, and I was nervous that it was going to be a bit of a slog because Punisher comics can be a bit of a slog sometimes. What makes him appealing to many people is also what can turn off a lot of people, that he's just this killing machine that, that's all he does. And some people love that, and people like myself don't. And I was worried that, every episode was just going to be a series of gun battles. So that's the sort of what I had resting on me going in was, don't love the character, really liked the performance, was nervous that it was just going to get teased in a hurry.
Now, I will say, when I watched John Bernthal on The Walking Dead, I didn't like the character. I know you're kind of not supposed to, but because of that, I wasn't crazy about the actor because that was all I knew him from. So I was like, oh, the guy who played the jerk-off. Okay. And I was okay with him in Daredevil. I wasn't completely in love with him. And I wasn't really crazy about the way they took the angle in Daredevil about the whole PTSD kind of thing, because I never got the sense from the comic books or from the movies or anything that he was just an unhinged, unable to put together the difference between right and wrong kind of guy, and had just jumped off his own moral cliff. And I was kind of happy that when we got into the show, that it really wasn't like that. He has a lot more control over his emotions and his actions than it kind of came off in Daredevil.
Yeah, I would say that, and we'll get into, how he portrayed and the sort of pacing of the show. I did really enjoy the actor, the way he portrayed it, the moments where you saw more than just killing guy and more than just murder guy and prepare to murder guy. There was a morality that they played pretty tightly, and when they broke that morality, there was reason behind it, which made it a lot more redeemable than just being shooty punchy guy.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree. I felt in Daredevil he came off more like Lewis Wilson did in this show, where he was kind of just, his brain wasn't firing on all cylinders. At least that's how the portrayal to me came off in Daredevil. So I was happy to see that they gave him, he was rationalizing things far more, and he just seemed a lot clearer of intent and drive in the actual series than he did when they introduced him in Daredevil.
That's really interesting. I didn't have that same feeling with him in Daredevil at all. I know they tried to use the PTSD as like a defense when he went on trial, but I never felt like he was any more unhinged than he is in the series. But that's interesting that you felt differently. Huh.
Okay, fair enough.
Sorry, I got distracted for a brief second there.
What was that about?
I apologize. There was a window that I had to super close, and then I lost track of the conversation. I was pulling up my notes, because I prepare.
Except for closing the window, evidently.
Well, the computer window, not the actual house window.
Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, at the beginning of the series, it starts off with him going on a bit of a rampage, clearing out who he thinks was in charge of the whole to-do. I'm correct in that?
I mean, it's more like he's finishing a rampage that he started sometime between his break at the end of Daredevil Season 2 and the beginning of this season. And so he seems to be down to the last few people on his list.
My confusion, I think, and maybe I had this wrong, was that at the beginning of the series with him, in his new persona, he's acting as if his job is done.
Well, that's his belief. So At the end of Season 2 of Daredevil, he is going off to kill the gangs that were involved in the crossfire that killed his family. Mm-hmm. And so at the beginning of Punisher Season 1, he's basically down to the couple of people he takes out in Mexico and the Kitchen Irish's lawyer who he kills in the bathroom at the airport. And at that point, he believes he's killed off everyone who's involved in that. And
I guess I understand why they did that, so they could have him start at zero. Mm-hmm. So the mission that we were expecting him to go on is completely done, and where are we going from here? I think it took me a while to get over the fact that we weren't going to see him going after those gangs, because my preconceived notion of what the show was going to be was, it's going to be him going after the gangs and him getting caught up, embroiled in the gang war in New York, especially when you look at like Luke Cage and Daredevil, where that's very much what the show's about. Mm-hmm. So I was super put off at first to see like, the whole plot that I thought they were doing, they just completed up in 30 seconds. Where's it going? And I ultimately realized that that was a very positive thing for the show, but at first I was super jarred by it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was your concern that this is the reason they did that. making him not be punchy, stabby, shooty guy. That, you know, if all he was going to do was take out these guys, that's exactly what the show would have been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and where we starting him as just rando, what was his name? Paul Castigliani?
It's Peter Castigliani.
Peter,
yeah.
By the end of episode 1, I saw his sort of vigilante superhero stuff, because that's really what first episode is, just to establish, like, oh, if he has to go fuck some dude up, he's going to, and here we go. Before we get into the big political stuff, I was more in than I thought I was going to be in that first 30 seconds, where I was just like, I don't know what the hell this is. My whole radar's off now. I have to like start from zero. And I think you're correct that it was very much to throw off the people who thought like I did that it was going to be that.
Mm-hmm. And I think it also lends to his arc as a character, is that he thinks, I think kind of foolishly, that he can finish this mission, avenge his family, and then just stop being Punisher. And I think we see over the course of the season that, like, at this point, he is more Punisher than he is Frank Castle. And that's a thing that's sort of in his blood, and he can't just be normal Peter who does construction.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that, because I think by the time the end of the series comes around, he realizes how deep the rabbit hole goes, and how there, not to make it cliche, but how there are always going to be people who need to be punished. This isn't just, hey, I got 2 more guys, then I can hang up this cape and, go to Chuck E. Cheese and hang out with the new girlfriend kind of thing. It's
right.
That's not going to be the life for him ever.
Mm-hmm. But wouldn't you have been completely like enthralled if the whole first episode was him doing exactly that?
Exactly what?
Just going to Chuck E. Cheese.
Oh, sure, yeah. Playing in the ball pit, eating the substandard pizza, maybe rocking out with cheese on the guitar. That would be great. But still in the Punisher costume.
Exactly.
Like, still with the spray
I have
painted.
this whole image of, like, the slow motion camera, all these kids jumping around and having a great time in a ball pit. And then, like, Rambo slowly raising out of the water.
Exactly.
You just see Punisher just slowly lifting up to eye level in the back of the ball pit. You're just like, oh my God!
I love the smell of mozzarella sticks in the morning.
That would be fantastic.
I mean, it would be a very different show at that point, but that would have been good.
But equally intriguing, I think, at that point. Hell.
Yeah, can you imagine if they opened with that instead of him taking out 2 people in Mexico with or across the border in Mexico?
And
that would be awesome.
Especially if the end of the episode of him throwing people in, wet concrete to be buried to death was the exact same ending.
Smash cut to that. Like, wait, what just happened? He just finished putting on the birthday hat at Chuck E. Cheese. How did we get here?
He had just won like a lot of tickets at skee ball.
I think that's what we need to do. We need to have some sort of TV show or movie, or at least an extended action sequence that is a juxtaposition between the severe violence of a guy getting revenge on his family being killed with, like, a carnival. Like, can you imagine him following, like, a mafia family, and the guy picks up that little water gun that you shoot in the clown's mouth and fill the balloon, and, like, the clown shoots back as he's shooting the water gun, like a red dot just slowly works up the mafia guy's chest? That would be fantastic. Oh, Hatton, write this down.
We got our next radio drama.
Oh, serious. But as much as I grew to like Bernthal's Punisher, I almost have to say that my favorite character of the series was Micro.
Yeah, I loved Micro. I thought he was great.
The portrayal of him was so different from anything that I had read in the comics for my limited time frame. But it was so well portrayed. I mean, the comics, he's always just kind of portrayed as like this sidekick who does all the tech stuff that Castle doesn't really understand. Whereas here, I don't want to say they were almost like antagonists or anti-heroes, but they were almost like anti-friends for most of the series.
Yeah. He's given a bigger range than he ever had in the comics. You know,
Yeah,
he's got
yeah.
his own personality. He's got his own drives.
I had the worry that he was, having not met Micro in the comics, or having any recollection of him anyway, that him having a tech sidekick character, that he would fall into that somewhat cowardly, somewhat weak, just lives in his bubble and doesn't go out because he's scared of the world type character. And what they gave you, his intensity when he's being intense was fantastic against Frank. And the things he allowed himself to be put through in those first few episodes to get Frank on his side, just literally telling Frank, like, no, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do, and Frank having a completely other idea, still holding up to him and saying, well, then you don't get any of the shit I'm doing, and you need me, so whatever. It was refreshing for the tech nerd character to not be that atypical tech nerd character, because I was worried about that first meeting. I'm like, oh, it's just going to be a closet dweeb. And his intensity was fantastic.
Yeah. Great.
Some of the stuff that I really liked was when he had to first type in his password to shut everything off. Like they made a big point of showing you all these little ticks and tweaks that he did with the tapping of the pencil, and how he would type in certain letters and then, you know, pinky for the shift and thumb on this letter kind of thing. Like, he had this really kind of almost ADD way of doing things. And at first I was like, okay, well, he's kind of a techie guy, so I guess I get that. And then when I went through and watched most of it the second time, I also think that a lot of that was him leading Frank into kind of trusting him, because Frank is, you know, an ex-Marine, a vigilante, a killer of men, and here's this tech guy who's got all these cameras set up watching his family, trying to protect them, duct taped naked to a chair. And the fact that he has the presence of mind to kind of get him to get Frank to a point where he doesn't notice that he takes this syringe, and when Frank comes over, he kind of injects it to him under the... That's a ballsy thing to do with a guy who has basically made a name for himself, assassinating people, not only in cold blood, but pretty much in broad daylight, too. So I thought it was really cool that they showed that he had that kind of composure, like, okay, fuck this, I'm not going to take this lying down, I have to get out of this situation, I don't care who this guy is. So there was a lot of courage to that character, and I know that was kind of a thing that came up through the series, too, about how much courage Micro had for just sitting behind a keyboard watching through cameras.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I mean, and just in general, his sort of outthinking of Frank in their first encounter shows that he's somebody who, you know, he doesn't have, obviously, Frank's ability to be violent, but he can play on the same level as Frank.
Right.
And I would say the balls to allow himself to be pummeled while still knowing that Frank ultimately is on the side of good. Because I don't know whether I'd believe somebody pummeling me is working for the side of good, especially if I put myself in the situation to be pummeled.
Right, and yeah, I mean, I was going to say, and being willing to be in that position for sort of your bigger goal. You know, being willing to take that kind of physical abuse because you know you have to get past that to get to, you know, the real Frank beneath kind of thing.
And what if he was wrong? You know, what?
Right,
if,
exactly. It's a risk.
I liked the somewhat creepiness of Micro's cameras and keeping track of I understood it. But I thought that if you're living in a bubble, but you have your house wired for sound with all sorts of, you know, tech and baubles, it showed his desperation just to hold on, which I really liked as well. It was the one thing that sort of tied them together, is their desperation for answers and a finish.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I agree. Micro is probably my favorite character, and I really, for as much as I loved to hate Billy.
Russo, yeah.
Yeah, I really, really, midway through the show, just wanted to just kick him down a flight of steps because he was the exact sort of person I dislike, and he was written so well that way that made me realize he's an amazingly good character.
Well, that was the flip that I was not prepared for. Watching them back in their Marine days, it's like, okay, I get how those two become friends. Watching him in his Anvil days, you're like, okay, this guy's, smarmy business guy who's in it for the money and is basically exploiting and taking advantage of the people he's working for, because he knows there's only one kind of life that they can really lead at this point. But at the end, on the merry-go-round, when that whole thing happened, I was just like, no, because I didn't realize who Billy Russo, what the name entailed in the bigger Frank Castle universe. So when he basically smashed his face into and like dragged it across that mirror and that broken glass, I was like, no, like all the gears finally clicked and all the light bulbs went on, and I'm like, and I was like, oh. So that shock and surprise for me was, I'm sure, something Punisher fans were waiting for when they heard the name Billy Russo from the beginning. Like, when's it going to happen? Where in the show are they going to do it? How is it going to come about? But it completely caught me off guard, and I loved that.
Yeah, that was a good twist, and it was Billy Russo's arc previous to where we meet him makes a certain amount of sense. That he's obsessed with this kind of proving himself to be part of a socioeconomic level that he didn't grow up in.
Right.
And so every move he's made has been in service of that. Like going into the Marines was in service of getting a certain status that would move him to the next level. Founding Anvil is part of that, and so on. So all of that goes together. And then when you learn what he's been doing behind the scenes, it even clicks together more, because you get the piece about sort of how he acquires his wealth as well.
So, which leads to the one character I really, really liked, but ultimately disappointed me, and that was Lewis. And that's because I loved it. I loved Lewis as a subplot. I thought it was a great sort of holdover plot in the middle, because I thought there was parts of the show that were a little too dry for my taste. But I thought the Lewis subplot was a perfect way to have another character, have another plot going through. It brings in Karen really well.
To be clear, Lewis is the recent returnee who we first meet in a soldier support group, who then goes on to be the sort of mad bomber character toward the end of the series.
Yes. I didn't think that subplot was given enough justice. It really felt like it was, here's the one episode, which was my favorite episode of the series, as we'll get through it. But I felt the ending of that subplot just kind of went, oh, okay, and now we're done with Lewis, and we're done with Karen. Let's get to the final act. It felt a little tossed together, but I thought they could have done Lewis a little more for his end.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been sort of a reoccurring theme with not all, but most of the Netflix series is that they don't do subplots throughout the series. They have these sort of mini arcs in the midst of the series where there are plots that they could have run through in the background or sort of more intertwined them for a bit, fuller a story. Like if you take Daredevil Season 2 and have him actively dealing with Frank and with Elektra at the same time, I think you might get a sort of a richer story. Instead, they're sort of divided into two different sections of the season, and there's a bit of that here as well. Like, if Lewis had been more integrated throughout the season, I think his ending would have been a bit more rewarding. Is not quite the right word, because he doesn't, he doesn't go easy, but a bit more fulfilling of that arc.
Rob, your thoughts?
Lewis was probably my least liked character in this whole series. I understand why he was there. I understand that it was kind of a counterpoint to Frank's journey to show that, they're kind of, in an abstract way, going through the fish out of water kind of thing. I know that's not the right term, but Lewis is having a hard time reintegrating back into normal society. For different reasons, Frank is kind of going through the same thing. And they were showing how one, it just turns out a lot worse for the person going through it than the other. I didn't like his character because I didn't like the fact that because of what he was going through, it felt like it was giving justification to certain tinfoil hat wearing members of, I'll say, current society in the stuff that's going on in the United States now, and it kind of put a bad taste in my mouth.
I thought, because I had that similar thought, like, is this just going to be showing how zealotous things can get? And I saw Lewis as Frank if Frank didn't have a place to point his rage. Because Frank has his whole, like, need to get revenge for my wife, need to find the people that fucked me over. Lewis didn't have somebody to point at. So would Frank, if without the problem with his wife, become something similar? I think that was the question you were supposed to ask. Now, I don't know whether I agree, because Frank sort of has a different moral compass, but that was what they were going for, and I liked it as this is how we leave our vets, which was ultimately the big, I guess, social message.
No, and I get that. The fact that the guy who was basically the devil's advocate and counterpoint to everything that was going on in the vet support group,
yes,
ended up completely being a sham, and that was one of the big things that kind of fueled Lewis. That look, here's a kindred spirit. He understands what I'm going through. He gets it, and then he turns out that no, I'm just fucking with everybody. I didn't really do any of that stuff. It just felt like, I don't know, like they were going out of their way to give Lewis justification to be the way that he was, and it felt very separate from the story of the rest of the show. It was my least favorite part of the whole series.
What I found super funny about that is so much more and I don't think I put it together until you just said it, that is also sort of a commentary about the same tinfoil hat stuff going on, and the trolls feeding trolls and not knowing what the trolls like on the other side.
Yeah,
which
I mean,
nice.
that was sort of exactly what it was. From my perspective, it's Lewis is being used from all sides.
Yeah,
but nobody knows exactly what they're winding up. So Russo ditches him at the first sign that he's just difficult to work with, not realizing how that's going to go. And then this guy from the support group is winding this guy up, not really anticipating how, he's not just another guy who's sort of popping off at the mouth, that there's something really dangerous there.
Karen?
Maybe what didn't sit right with me was that it all felt too close to home.
True.
And maybe that's why I felt, is this, I guess I can say, is it really needed in a show like this? But when you're talking about a guy who's a military vet and he's coming home and he's dealing with that kind of stuff, I mean, it's not outside. It's not outside the norm for a show like that to deal with these kind of issues. It's just that the way it seemed to be portrayed in the current climate felt like it was a little too close to the surface.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's, as Jamie said, he exists to contrast with Frank, but he's also exists to, you can debate how well this happens, but to put Frank's mission into relief, like, is Frank's mission really all that different? And that's not unusual for a Punisher book to have that as well, In Ennis's run early on, they introduced these characters. It's the Elite, Mr. Payback, and there's a third that I'm forgetting. He's the priest. I can't remember his name, though. The host, maybe? Something like that. But in any case, there are three characters who are dispatching criminals, and the point is, and Frank doesn't like that they exist. And the point with them is, how different are they, or in what ways are they different? And I saw him being kind of a similar device. And just, when you're talking about violence these days, and when you're talking about soldiers who are violent in this way, that's an archetype, unfortunately, that we have these days. And I understand what you mean. Like, it feels too close to home, but I don't think that's an accident. I think it's supposed to be uncomfortable. I think it's supposed to be skin crawling, and that doesn't mean you have to like it. But I don't think they accidentally fell on that.
Oh, no. I think it was absolutely a conscious decision, and I'm sure my reaction to it is probably one of the reactions they were going for. So in that respect, hey, bravo on them. But yes, you got the reaction from me or one of the reactions that you were probably hoping for. The fact that I was like, I don't know that this needs to be here.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. On the other hand, like, I'm kind of fascinated by the idea that you can watch a show where a man violently murders people who arguably are bad, and we're like, that's all right with me. And then there's this one guy who sets off a bomb in the course of the show, and we're like, oh, it's too close to home.
Yeah.
It's an interesting juxtaposition. And like I said, there's no wrong reaction here, but I just think that
I think the thing that bugs me about it is when you look at the Punisher side of it, it's like, okay, there were three different gangs that basically were there, as we find out, maybe not so accidentally, and eliminated his whole family. So this is like a typical vengeance, vendetta kind of superhero storyline where he is the true vigilante out there getting revenge for his family. And then you look at somebody like Lewis, and it's like, okay, yes, I understand that he's a soldier. I understand that society isn't really taking care of their soldiers who are going through PTSD when they come back from the war. But when the buttons that push him are that a cop gets lippy with him and a guy who he thought was a brother in arms turned out to be a liar, that just seems like there are a lot more people out there in the world potentially who can relate to Lewis and say, well, yeah, maybe I'll build a bomb too, than can relate to Frank Castle and say, yeah, let me spray paint the skull on a bulletproof vest and go out and get mine. That's why I think I felt more uncomfortable about how close to home it was, because I think a lot more people could realistically be inspired by Lewis than they would be by Frank Castle, and that's pretty much what bothered me.
Okay.
So, getting into the big plot, what did you guys think of the, I guess we'll call it web of intrigue? Because there was the one failing I found in the show was that it felt, how we got from A to Z, and I really enjoyed A and I really enjoyed Z. I felt that the middle political structure stuff went a little slow and a little convoluted at times to get us to where we needed to go. It did lose me in the middle for a little while, and I would say the last couple episodes ramped up amazingly so. But what did you guys think about the overarch plot of Kandahar and who did it and why and etc.?
I mean, Madani, from what I know, isn't a character that came out of the comic books, so they kind of made that whole thing for the show. The fact that somebody was trying to be like a WikiLeaks kind of thing and a whistleblower and show the shadier shit that was going on overseas that Micro was doing by releasing that DVD. I think it was a good drive as to show why Castle's in the situation that he's in, and to give kind of another constant foil that's out there that now knows that Castle's alive and is looking for him. It's almost, in my opinion, kind of like that the FBI to Castle is kind of like the Hand to Daredevil, where they're always going to be there. They're always going to end up showing up somewhere, to foil a plot somewhere down the road or to make things more complicated than they need to be. It's just kind of a good generic, there's this underlying concern that he always has to have that any one of these people that he's walking past in the street could end up being, an FBI agent or a Homeland agent who may end up recognizing him and can complicate things.
Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, I do agree that there are parts in the middle that are pretty draggy. On the other hand, all the characters, or not all the characters, but a lot of the characters are all reflections on Frank. So the Madani is heading towards Franktown, if you will. She's obsessed with avenging her partner, but she's still working with the law. But as that goes on, it becomes increasingly unclear how long she's going to be able to stay on that side of the law if nothing interrupts her. We already talked about Lewis. Billy is, Frank who has no morality, only cares about his achievements. So I like that we have a series of these sort of echoes throughout the show on either side of the law. And I think that's important, like I said, to illuminate the kind of character that Frank is and to draw differences between him and, say, an unhinged vigilante like Lewis, who doesn't really have a code and is sort of striking out at shadows as opposed to established villains like Frank does, or Madani, who is after established villains and maybe possibly slowly losing her soul and heading towards where Frank already is. But I do think there was a needless complexity to it all that didn't necessarily need to be there.
Yeah.
I think you could tell a story of government corruption that even has as many twists as this story had, but just divvy them out a little bit quicker, and that would have been okay. And yet, on the other hand, I'm doubling back again because one of my favorite aspects of the entire show was when Micro and Frank get drunk together after Micro's wife kisses Frank when he goes over to the house. And, they have this fairly long, entirely dialogue-driven scene where they talk about that and they talk about how they met each other, how they met their wives and when they knew they were in love and things like that. And I think that's an incredible scene, but that does nothing to advance the plot either. So, I'm sort of talking out of both sides of my mouth about moving the plot forward faster.
I'm with you that was as to develop Micro more thoroughly. I think that scene was necessary.
Well, it even develops Frank more.
Sure.
You get his kids never really become human, but his wife becomes more of a full-rounded human being in that scene as well, as opposed to just this sort of symbol of his anger. Like, you can understand why a man like him would have loved her so much and would have been so absolutely devastated by losing her, and that it's more than just, a man loves his wife. Like, she was something very singular to him, and really represented something that kept him grounded.
Which did an amazing job of also explaining why Micro had nothing to worry about with Frank, that he wasn't looking for a new love interest. There was none of that. And if there was a moment earlier in the show where you might have thought that was where it was heading, that series of sequences was concrete. It's not what we're going for here. I think my favorite representation of Frank's wife in the show was in the last act, when Frank is getting the utter piss beaten out of him, when she represents sort of release and death. This sequence where they keep flashing to her as, again, he's getting the snot beat out, and she's just, come with me, and then final scene is him, their hands separating, and there's just all of the blood of him post beat down sort of all over her hands too, that he's decided to stay. If that was, I believe, my favorite part of his wife as a character. I felt that early on she was used a little bit manipulatively, and again, fine. You're supposed to feel bad for him. It's the sympathy card. Later, I felt she was much more an interesting. Frank can be with her again. Frank can have what he wants, and he realizes he wants to stay and live and sort of let go of that, which I really enjoyed.
Right. And that's also the moment I think his mission stops being about just vengeance. Well, we'll have to see what he's like next time we see him, but like that moment, it becomes about more than just him getting revenge at the people that hurt his family. Like, he has more of a reason to cling to life than just than just murdering other people in that moment. Like, he knows that, like, Micro is depending on him to complete this mission and that sort of thing. So again, we'll see if it pays off in future seasons. Sure. But it's a growth moment where he sort of accepts that it can't just be about vengeance for him. It's a bigger mission than that. And
likely the reason he doesn't kill Russo at the end. Yeah. Rob?
No, I agree. I agree with what you said about his wife. It was definitely one of those things where it was almost like, what kind of reminded me about it was, it felt like The Crow, where kind of throughout the movie, he's having the flashbacks of his girlfriend is kind of what's keeping him driving. And then once the whole thing gets resolved, it's like he doesn't need that memory of her in that way to drive him along any further. I felt very similarly about Frank's wife, that he was kind of using that memory to fuel him to keep going forward. And then once that whole thing got resolved, it was as much as I like this memory, it's a very painful memory, and I don't need to hold on to it in that way anymore.
So why don't we discuss the violence of the show? I was completely jarred by the depravity of violence in the show, and that's not me saying, I was like, oh, how dare they, but more, I was not expecting it from the show at all. And right from the get-go, in that first where he drops the dudes in the cement mixer, but there's so many sickening crunches.
Oh yeah,
he beats the guy with a crowbar, and in later episodes, I mean, up until sort of the biggest, most violent, literally winced with Russo and the glass mirror. It was super over the top, and I think what Punisher should be to some degree. But I was completely blown away by the amount. What are you guys' thoughts?
Well, it's the first Punisher thing, live action thing, I think, that I've seen at least, and I would venture to guess that's been made, where the violence isn't sort of comic booky, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Very much so.
I mean, obviously the one with Tom Jane in particular is very silly in its violence, but even War Journal, which is a little bit of a darker take, there is a ludicrous, over-the-top nature to the violence. Here, everything, like you said, like it's over the top in that there's a ton of it, but it's sickening, and it's like you feel pain, and his pain is very real, and his blood is very real. You know what I mean? So, on the one hand, there's a ton of it, but on the other hand, like it all hurts. It's very real, if that makes sense.
Yes, and he has lingering damage throughout the series. There is an aspect of it where he does have a bit of a superhuman healing capacity, but fine, comic book show. But the fact that in some episodes he has yellowed bruises and there's red circles around his eyes, it definitely shows the wear and tear that it's had on Frank, which I found. If you're going to show the realistic violence, I appreciate that they're showing the realistic ramifications of it. Rob, what'd you think about the beat 'em ups?
There was a fuck ton of violence in this series. There is no getting around that. I think, in my opinion, in hindsight, they gave people a fair amount of warning when he goes ham on that wall with the sledgehammer. And kind of loses his mind and then drops the sledgehammer, and you see those bloody fingerprints from where he was gripping it so tight. I like to think that's the show's way of going, this is going to get uncomfortable in the violence department, so buckle up. The ease that he went through the Mafia card game, from a choreography standpoint, I thought it was absolutely brilliant and well done. The beating the crap out of him towards the end of the series, where Billy Russo's just going off on him, and it's just, just fists and up to your forearms full of blood, and Frank's just battered hamburger face sitting there getting punched around. It felt like some of it could have been a little more than was necessary, but in honesty, I think it serves the story. I mean, this is a violent character. I think my biggest fear was that since it's Marvel/Disney and it's on Netflix, they were going to try to rein some of that in. I'm kind of glad they didn't. I think one of the biggest shock factors in the violence, and it wasn't even overly violent, but when Castle's going after Rollins, and he's outside his house trying to snipe his way in, and he's sitting there drinking the drink at the window, and he pops that shot that hits him in the forehead. I honestly thought that, like, it shocked me more when he moved away from the window and you saw that bullet crack on there on the bulletproof glass. It's, I don't know. I know I'm rambling here, but it's one of those shows where it's a violent character in violent situations. And if you kind of half-ass it on the violence, then I think it takes away the intensity of the character. There was a fair amount of stuff that they also didn't show. Because when he does beat the hell out of those construction guys, I think there's a point where he kind of stands the sledgehammer down, and just the head of the sledgehammer is all bloody and whatnot. So they kind of slowly work you into the violence that will happen towards the end of the season. They don't just start off with people getting heads cut off and skulls caved in, but it does ramp up quickly, and the end does get pretty severe. Overall, I was okay with it though.
As a quick comment to the bulletproof glass scene, and my other favorite similar sequence when Russo is at Curtis's house in the last episode, and Curtis hands him the cup of coffee, and in that one moment, Russo realizes that he's like, "Ah, shit," and drops. Both of those felt the most comic book in this series, and in really good ways. Like, they felt like panel work. Well, Tim, thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, that in particular, you could see that storyboarded out, you know, like if it was a comic, the focus on the coffee cup tumbling down and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think because of, you know, in reference to the bullet hitting the bulletproof glass and the coffee cup, those scenes in particular, I think because the level of violence was so intense and so bruising, those scenes do pop because they are in some ways quieter. They grab your attention because those people both get elevated to like true antagonists for Frank. You know, that Billy is able to realize in time to avoid getting shot what's going on. And they call him Agent Orange. I can't remember his full name, but Agent Orange doesn't necessarily know that Frank's coming, but is smart enough to have planned ahead. If anybody's going to come and take a shot at him, he's ready for them. And so it sort of points out that these guys are playing in a different league than the thugs that Frank has, you know, taken care of over the course of the series so far.
You make a
William Rawlins was the character.
Thank you. Yes.
You make a really good point, because with a normal superhero show, the way they show it is, you know, character uses superpowers on bad guy blows them off, brushes them off like they're nothing. Now you know who the supervillain is. In these, when it's just people using fists, weapons, guns, etc., they deflected his bullet, which is really his superpower. So, no, it's a really great comparison to make. I like it.
Yeah, there were a few scenes in this show that literally made me gasp out loud, and that sniper attempt was one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Which leads us to sort of the last couple episodes, because I think if the show lost me in the middle, the last couple episodes were so super tight, where up until then you see Russo as sort of ruthless, and he's handling it from a manager's perspective. He's sending guys after Frank. Anytime he gets involved, you know, he keeps his distance or gets in the way. Mm-hmm. In those last couple episodes where he sort of rises to be a formidable individual foe was when I was gripped. Those last two episodes had me hook, line, and sinker. There was, they were tightly plotted, tightly scripted, and I understand you can't do a whole show like that, but if they were 3 episodes sooner, I would probably rank it as my favorite Marvel series. With the little dead spots in the middle, I think Daredevil still holds.
Yeah, I mean, those last 2 episodes are also great, even though they're covered in blood.
Yes.
Depictions of tactics. You know, everything Frank does, Billy or Rollins has a counter to, and vice versa. You know, they think they've got Micro, and then Frank helps them, the FBI, make it look like Micro got killed. You know, so it's this move and counter move thing that's happening even as the bullets are flying. The show makes sure you never lose sight of the fact that these guys are military men who are used to planning and preparing. They're not just, you know, no matter how violent they get, until the very end, they're not just wounded animals. And that's what makes that last fight scene even more brutal, is you know that these are 2 guys who are just on empty right now, and all they have is this desire to destroy one another because they're both all out of tricks.
And that last scene, what I loved about the carousel sequence from top to bottom was, you see the carousel a bunch of times throughout the series. It's a big carousel, but it's still just a carousel, and they're treating it like it's a war. Like it's a war ground. Like it's the way they're moving through them, the way they're checking their corners, the way they're going through it, was really well done from just the way they shot it, because it's chaos, and it's just a carousel.
Right. Yeah, and literally feet are separating these two guys at points. That there are, until they're engaged in straight up hand-to-hand combat, they're still only 8 feet apart, and yet they're still, like you said, playing angles, coming from the top or coming down low, looking for every bit of ground they can gain to use to their advantage until they're literally doing hand-to-hand combat, at which point that all goes out of the way, and it's just pure anger that they're feeling their fight.
Yeah, I liked how the whole start of that sequence, like you said, felt very I'll use the words technical and professional in their given profession, that yes, they're kind of absorbing everything that's around them, and you can almost see their brains making these lightning fast calculations of where's the best place for me to move, what's the best way for me to duck around this horse so I don't expose myself but try to keep an eye towards the target, kind of thing. And I think we kind of saw glimpses of that throughout the series, where they show Frank overseas and they're trying to evac, and he basically takes that building on his own. That at some point, military training and knowledge kind of kicks in as just an automated reflex. And a lot of that carousel fight, to me, was watching these guys on basically automatic reflex go through and do what they were trained and designed and built to do, until, yes, at the end, there is nothing left, but I'm going to, beat you with whatever is handy and then run you into a mirror 8 or 9 times, because that's all I have left. I have nothing else.
Right.
So, Mr. Tim, you are beloved for your knowledge of Easter eggs and throwaways and, the fan servicey stuff. There was no night nurse.
No, there's no night nurse this time.
Yeah. First Marvel show without her.
First time we see none of her, which is kind of funny. In this case, they used Karen as sort of the transition character to connect everybody.
And what's funny is there's actually a spot in the show where they could have put her in, and instead they use I would keep calling her Midori, and I know that's not right. They keep using
Madani, her parents.
Yeah, they use her parents as the foil for that. But I guess it doesn't make sense that someone would have known who she was, and Karen was nowhere around at that point. So,
right.
So what were some of the throwaways?
I mean, there's a lot of repurposed characters that show up in the series. So Curtis Hoyle is a character. That's the guy, Frank's buddy, who runs the support group. He does show up in the comics, but he's a villain in the comics, and I think he's actually one of the first villains you see in Punisher's first full series. But he's a pure villain that Frank goes undercover to discover who he's working for. Rollins is a character from the comics as well. Stan Ori. Rollins' arc is more or less the same as in the comics. He's less involved in the killing of Frank's family, but he occupies a similar role. Stan Ori, who's the senator who's pro-gun control, in the comics he's a dirty cop who Frank attempts to kill his son or does kill his son, and then Stan Ori hires a hitman to try to take out Frank, and that doesn't go well. So there's a lot of characters that have names that are familiar, but then go on to have different fates in the show in comparison. What else?
Who does Russo, for people who don't know, myself included, who is Jigsaw as within the comic?
Within the comic, he's just a mob guy. He's a particularly, the whole obsession with his looks thing is a thing from the comics, but he's just a mob guy who is fairly tenacious. And then I think Frank kills whoever the head of Billy Russo's crime family is. Billy Russo takes it personally, and eventually, Frank repays him by scarring his face, and then he becomes one of the few villains that Frank doesn't just outright kill, because he's sort of a cockroach of sorts that always manages to escape, no matter how much Frank deploys in his direction.
Okay.
So I like the change they make, by more intimately connecting him, because he's just another villain for Frank in the comics. He sort of gets his status from the fact that he's hard to kill, as opposed to there's any particular emotional connection between the two.
So where do we go? Because I actually had a thought that they might kill him at the end. Because now that his major arc is completed, I don't know what they have left for him to do without becoming sort of the Punisher we were talking about earlier, that is a directionless gun pointed at a thing.
Right.
Rob, do you have any ideas where they could go?
I'm honestly not sure. I'm curious, since they've brought Karen Page in, they're telling us that it is connected to all the other Marvel Netflix shows, and I mean, he was in Daredevil, but I don't know how they keep him in the other shows like that, unless it's just going to be, minor cameos from other actors in Punisher, or if he's going to show up as minor cameos in their shows. We clearly have a much bigger overlap with the Defenders with the previous 4 shows. I don't want it to become an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of thing where, there's kind of a nod in one direction, but not in the others. And we know that they're all in the same universe, but why don't they ever really cross paths with each other? I honestly don't know where they go from here. I think Jigsaw is probably leaning to be kind of their major foil, especially since he's working hand in hand with the CIA director. They'll probably make him a bigger villain than he was in the comics and keep him around as the main foil, but I honestly don't know where they go from here.
You make a really good point with that, because since this show had this type of violence, and Daredevil has its own brand, and Luke Cage has its own brand, but I have a hard time seeing Daredevil in this violence.
I'd be shocked to see it in any of the other shows so far as they've been depicted.
Yeah.
And Daredevil would be the closest, but even then, there just isn't this kind of commitment to the bloodshed, which makes a certain amount of sense. He uses guns and knives. As brutal as Daredevil is, he's using clubs. It just never reaches the same point. I guess there's a couple of different directions. Like, he can continue to be a kind of foil for Daredevil, or sort of there I go, but by the grace of God for Daredevil kind of character. It depends how, in the larger Netflix, I guess I have less of an idea. In terms of just as a solo character in his own series, there's a couple of intriguing directions they can go from the comics, or they can just go from where they are right now. He can literally have the full force of the CIA let loose on him, and that can be an intriguing story arc. One of the arcs I really liked in the comics that I thought would be interesting to see is he goes undercover at one point and becomes like a mob bodyguard. And, to put this character, now that he's free of his specific brand of vengeance and has made it sort of a larger mission, to have him adopt another identity and to be sort of more smart and tactical,
covert,
as opposed to reactive, would be an intriguing direction to take the character. But I don't know. And also, gives you that sort of thing where you have the hero who goes in with this idea of the enemy he's facing and what happens when they become more full-rounded human beings to him. How does that affect him? I don't know.
Yeah,
Those are just a couple ideas off the top of my head.
They left it very wide open. I think with the other shows, there was a much clearer direction as to, oh, okay, this is where they can go with it. Mm-hmm. This one, not at all. But I mean, they could do it. I have no doubt. Oh, pardon me. That the writing of it was tight enough that I see no worries that they'll be able to pull something off.
Right. And the other thing is, we don't know what exactly what's going to happen with, say, Daredevil. But if we end up with the final elimination of the Kingpin, either by, like going away and never coming back or something to that effect, the fallout from that and the people scrambling to fill the void now that the Hand's not on the scene anymore, and the Kingpin, presuming he gets out of jail for season 3 and then gets put back in, really seems to be eliminated from the table. Do you have New York going into a full-out gang war? And if so, maybe that's how you get your Punisher in, because, on the one hand, you've got somebody like Daredevil who's trying to stem the tide, whereas for Punisher, it's just an excuse to go hunting.
That's actually it's kind of an intriguing point that you make there. If there is a power vacuum, we know Marvel is not against taking themes and like Civil War was not the Civil War from the comic books,
right?
But they took that overall theme of having to take sides against each other, and just flip it into a completely new and original story. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't put it past them to take like a Warzone take on a future season of Punisher, in that, hey, there is no Kingpin, so now you've got 6, 7, 8 different underworld crime establishments trying to vie for it, and basically making the city into a war zone that he's trying to keep quelled. And it could be an interesting thing to have a Daredevil or a Luke Cage kind of cameo in a scene like that, because it would show that as much as they're superheroes and as much as they have their own place in kind of their parts of the city and in their parts of the criminal underworld, this is definitely not the place that they usually lurk. Mm-hmm. And it could be kind of a right tool for the right job kind of thing, where it's like, look, you guys are great in Harlem and in Hell's Kitchen, but you don't know how to deal with people like this, so let me take this one.
Right.
That could be pretty interesting. If they do that, I have to say, as a guilty pleasure, I would love to see them have Ray Stevenson be one of the heads of the crime families. I was recently rewatching Rome. He's a great actor. He's a great character actor. Rome would have fallen much sooner if not for Tito Spillo. So yeah, I would love to just see a little nod to that and have him play one of the crime bosses.
Which I think,
but that's me. Marvel, Netflix, if you're listening, get him on the phone.
So overall thoughts on the show. Mine is, I felt it dragged in the middle, but it had me at the beginning and it had me at the end. So subtract a couple episodes, which again is sort of the Marvel Netflix thing, where there's always one or two many episodes. I enjoyed it more than I expected to, and gave me legitimate cringes at times for the right reasons. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel very similarly. I came in hoping the performances would save the season for me, and I think they did. It did get a little bit grindy towards the middle, like I was afraid, but it pulled out of it pretty quickly. The last 2 episodes are a really impressive feat of ratcheting up tension without it just devolving into gun battle after gun battle, and not losing sight of, the fact that the Punisher, out of all these characters, is still very much a human, and even in his timetable, even with the Iraq War as opposed to Vietnam, of course, but he's still a man who's got to be in his late 30s, his early 40s, and it shows. He takes on damage, and so overall, enjoyed's a hard word to put to this series, but
Right.
I think the performances did save it, and it did do some interesting stuff on the action that worked out a lot better than I was anticipating. So I certainly recommend it, and for real super Punisher fans, definitely think they'd get a lot of enjoyment out of it.
And Rob?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to rank it out of all the other Marvel Netflix shows, I probably put it behind Daredevil and probably nothing else. Jessica Jones could probably be tied for second with it in a completely different type of show, but it definitely held me a lot more than Luke Cage and Iron Fist did. I think that was more because I just felt the character had more depth to it. Take nothing against Luke Cage, but again, in my opinion, when you're making a show, an action show based around a guy whose big powers are he's strong and he can't be hurt. If you've ever played MMO games and you've played a tank, the guy who basically just stands up front and absorbs all the damage so all your friends can kill all the bad guys, when you're playing that game solo and it's just, okay, everybody beat the shit out of me and I will slowly hurt you until you die because you're not hurting me, that's fun for about 5 minutes. There just didn't seem to be a whole lot of flexibility and difference and variety in the types of action in Luke Cage, so it kind of got a little dry for me quick. But I thought the Punisher was a really good show, and I would definitely recommend it. I went into it, like I said, knowing a little bit, and I learned a lot more from the show, and it did catch me off guard in a couple of points, and I loved that. I thought it was really well done.
Well, fantastic. So that brings us to our normal sort of end Jimmy Jam of asking you, Mr. Stevens, what you've been reading. Is there anything good on the funny books?
It just came out this week, so it's on today actually, so it's on my mind. But the new Moon Knight series, which has old numbers on it, so it's 191 right now, written by Max Bemis, currently actually, I guess, of the band Say Anything. It's a really interesting book. I would highly recommend that. If you're an X-Men fan, you might be into the fact that Phoenix is coming back.
So I've heard.
We kept it pretty subtle, but you might have heard about that. The Avengers book has gone weekly, and it's got Mark Waid, who's an old standby, and two newer writers who I really like, both of Jim Zub and in particular Al Ewing, who's just done some incredible stuff the past 2 years at Marvel. So on the Marvel side, I really recommend those books. DC, if you like Grant Morrison's JLA, I would check out Justice League of America, written by Steve Orlando, who's pulling in a lot of those characters. He just did an arc with Prometheus, who he'd previously used in the Midnighter run as well. He does a nice Prometheus. And the issue after that, he had a one-shot with Aztec, the new Aztec, and that was pretty cool. So if you like that, throwback to that era, that's highly recommended. And Dark Knight's Metal is just bizarre. It's this Batman series about Batmans in different dimensions, if they had been sort of broken by their tragedies at different points in their career and what they would have done coming into the main DCU. And it's wild and just insanely over the top. But if you go in for that for comics that are just, throwing out everything in the bag and really pushing the idea of the sort of Bat God character, like Morrison wrote him back in the late 90s, early 2000s, that should tickle your funny bone.
It's Mark Waid on Avengers. Is he grounding it a bit more? Because the last time I tried to pick up Avengers, I jumped into Hickman and promptly...
It's a very different book now, yeah.
And promptly put it back down.
Yeah, it's definitely a very different book. And given that it's the fourth issue, I think, so it's only a month in right now, is a pretty good time to jump on to this weekly series.
And I love Waid.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, and I love Mark Waid.
Yeah, yeah, and you can definitely feel his hand in it. Um, yeah, the Hickman stuff was more or less done by Secret Wars, and that was a book. If you missed the first 2 months, like you just might as well sit out until he's done with the book because he had a very complex plan and mythology that he was working with.
Yeah,
which can be great if you're on board from the beginning, but if you try to jump on in the middle, that's like trying to jump on a moving train.
Yeah, I picked up Secret War because I saw that it was the big to do, and I'll if I'm not reading a series, I'll just try and go see what the big thing is. If only just to see the big set pieces and to see who dies and whatever.
Right.
And I picked up Secret War, and I saw all of those weird like metal people, and they're dying left and right, and there's badness going on. But since I had no idea who they were or where they came from, I felt no sympathy.
Or why you'd care? Yeah, I definitely understand.
I was like, oh, that person I just met's gone. Sure, their parents are sad. So,
and just lastly, since we're talking about Punisher today, Garth Ennis, who's considered probably the preeminent Punisher writer of the late 20th century, early 21st century, has a Punisher miniseries, maybe in its 4th or 5th issue, called Platoon. I haven't read it because I'm not a huge Punisher fan, but if you really like Garth Ennis' Punisher, then there's another helping of it. And Becky Cloonan just finished a run on Punisher, which is noteworthy because Steve Dillon, who was responsible for the look of Punisher in a lot of those Garth Ennis books, passed away 4 or 5 issues into that run. So it's the last you'll ever see of Steve Dillon's very distinctive take on Punisher.
wow.
So if you fell in love with that, that's your last opportunity to see him draw him. And he does a really nice job.
I would also tag on that if you've never read Preacher, that is
that's
also
another great Dillon art.
Yeah, Dillon and Ennis, and it's probably Ennis at his most. I can do whatever the fuck I want, and it's just a great book across the board. Well, that's my list of things. Rob, you got anything else?
No.
Fantastic.
I haven't. I mean, I haven't been in the comic book scene for quite a while, so unfortunately, I have nothing to add to that conversation.
Fair enough. So where?
I mean, if you want to hear completely unrelated stuff, sure. But
give me one
comic book. Carver Kings on Netflix. Fucking silly show. Fell in love with it. It's these guys who are professional log carvers and just do log carver art with chainsaws.
Oh boy.
And it's one of those like, oh, this will be, interesting for 5 minutes, and 6 episodes later, I'm like, that's a fucking eagle. That's fucking amazing. It's just one of those silly things that just grabs you and wouldn't let go.
Sounds like me.
That's all I got.
Go ahead, Tim.
I said if we're going to do Netflix recommendations, it's the end of the word is fucking, but the way it shows up on your Netflix is the end of the effing world, a British TV series. I forget it's very few episodes, but this kid who is convinced he's a sociopath meets this girl who doesn't really give a damn about anyone and is incredibly rude and decides he's going to murder her. But before he does so, while he's planning to, they begin this sort of tentative friendship, and then they go on a little bit of a road trip, and it's really interesting. It's really well done, and it is not your usual take on like, no, actually they're both great people. Like, he's not wrong about him being about his self-diagnosis, and at the same time, you never know exactly where the show is going to go. Like, there is a very strong possibility he will actually follow through with it, but at the same time, there are hints that he won't. It's just very well done, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, you are not the first person to recommend it to me. Apparently, it is a show that tells people that Jamie should see it for some reason. Because I think
everybody should see it. I think it's great, but yes, you would enjoy it.
Because I've had 3 people independently of themselves come up and say, Jamie, I saw the show that you should watch.
Yeah, I would. And also streaming now on, I think it's Hulu, is Lost. I don't know if you've heard of that show. but I would recommend that as well.
So, and my one Netflix thing that I watched that we sort of binge watched around the house here in our cooking show binges, Zumbo's Amazing Dessert or Fantastic Desserts is on Netflix. And
Zumbo's Just Desserts.
Just Desserts, fine.
You were close.
He's an Australian dessert creator, but when I say dessert creator, I don't mean it's not like Cupcake Wars where they're like, hey, let's try putting salt on this. No, he creates like it's a chocolate hat that when you pour hot cocoa on it, it melts away, and underneath is another cake, and within that is 4 other things,
Cool.
and people have to recreate them.
Dude. Zumbo's was out of this fucking... It was ridiculous. I thought the show was awesome.
Yeah, he's Wonka, and they decorate the whole thing to be very Wonka looking.
Yeah.
So when you see the desserts he creates, you feel like there's a certain amount of Wonka madness in this guy.
Yeah, it's a cooking competition show where like the two who score, you do your own thing based on the theme, and then the two who score the lowest have to recreate some crazy, ridiculous dessert that he created. And that's like really where the madness steps in. It's watching somebody say he used modeling chocolate and marzipan and made a car, but it starts and you can drive it, and I have 3 hours to make that. Like, that's where the real lunacy of the show really kind of kicks in, because the dude is off his rocker, but in a great way.
And the funny thing about that is that you know that it took him 6 hours to prepare this to perfection, and he's given them 3.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's how those cooking shows always go.
Yeah.
You know, if I did this in my kitchen, it would take me 4.5 hours. You have 30 minutes.
Right, of course.
Okay. One last note. The one thing I watched before we came on to record, I don't know if you've ever seen the James Corden rap battle things that he does, the drop the mic stuff.
Yeah.
There was one that just showed up on my Facebook feed where it's him against Helen Mirren.
What?
Oh, jeez.
She murderates him. It is so awesome.
Does she go gangsta?
Oh my god, dude! I thought the Samuel L. Jackson one he did was good, but watching this Helen Mirren one was pretty amazing.
All right. Since you mentioned Drop the Mic, if you like that, I have 2 quick recommendations for you. One is there's a podcast called The JV Club that's hosted by Janet Varney. The most recent episode has one of the 2 main writers on there. So you can watch that and hear her talk about writing for them as well as growing up and things like that. And the other main writer is a guy by the name of Jensen Karp, who has his own podcast called Get Up on This, which is just a weekly podcast about like things you might not have heard of in the world, especially music, because he's a former rapper. I recommend both of those, that episode of JV Club and Get Up on This every week, very highly. And if you like the Drop the Mic, you'll probably enjoy those as well.
Very cool.
Well, Mr. Stevens, where can people find you and all of your wonderful work?
You can find me at Ungajje on Twitter. That's UNGAJJE. I just recently got a new job. I am a head clinician at 2 group homes.
Congratulations.
So I've been tweeting a little bit less because I'm getting into the flow of it. But there's still some, high quality content there. And you can find my website at Tim Stevens is Ungajje. As of today, I just finished my yearly project called the January Project, which I write 1 flash fiction entry a day for 31 days. Based on a randomly selected song from my music library. So that finished off today. And tomorrow I will have up on the site the best of this year's project, in my opinion, for easy perusal. But I encourage you to check out as many of those as you would like. I'm at marvel.com. I do psych wards, which are psychological breakdowns of the characters as if I'm a therapist in the Marvel Universe, and then I do a host of interviews and other things for them. And lastly, I do a weekly column at comicsverse.com. And if you're interested in Punisher in particular, I would suggest searching for my Punisher column there, in which I talked about my discomfort with Punisher as a character, the way he's received in the public, especially by police officers and military individuals. Because I describe it as, inviting somebody to a party that you don't know if everybody's going to get along with. And it turns out they love him, but then when you talk to the people afterwards, they love him for like all the wrong reasons. And that's sort of how I feel about Punisher. It's like, I think he's this morally complex character, and he's conflicted, and he's sort of the dark side of vigilantism. But then you see the way cops and military men react to him, and it's as though he's this example, and that makes me deeply uncomfortable. So look for that.
Excellent.
Patton, where can they find your vinyl offerings?
Well, they could go to Tim Stevens is Ungaj. That would be reallyshameless.com, where now we have Decal Club, where you can get specially curated exclusive decals every month from various topics. For February, we are doing Overwatch and Firefly, because I know people will buy those.
You ever hear this show called Firefly? Apparently people like that show.
Apparently. There's one or two people.
It was shiny. With any luck, viewers of the sports ball they won't actually see me, but maybe they will see the results of my work. I've been practicing my latent psychic abilities because, as we all know, we are recording right now on Wednesday, January 31st, this coming Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday, Patriots-Eagles. I am really trying to hone my latent psychic abilities to just, in a celebrity deathmatch kind of way, drop the entire lighting rig on both teams. So
if only.
if that happens to come to pass on Sunday, you can thank your friend Podcast Rob. The Super Bowl party I will be at, we are actually looking to live stream old Super Bowls on YouTube instead of watching the current one.
Did you hear what happened to Tom Brady today? The dog?
No.
He got attacked by a dog. Apparently, like, some sort of charity organization brought the dogs they had trained for like bomb sniffing things to the Gillette Stadium now. Right. And Tom Brady raised his hands over his head as sort of a stretch, but that's a signal for the dogs. And one of the dogs broke rank and attacked him, and the wrangler couldn't get him in time, so he has a big cut on the back of one of his legs, apparently.
Nice.
I don't wish anyone ill, obviously, but like I just get a kick of that.
They need to bring those dogs to the Super Bowl, so every time they score a touchdown and they make that sign with their hands, the whole team gets attacked. That would be fantastic. Yeah, I'm making. I've decided for my friend's Super Bowl party, I'm making Rice Krispie treats. They are going to be Cocoa Crispy Rice Krispie treats, and I am molding them into the shape of miniature footballs, and then I am flattening them, so they look deflated. I don't care. Joke's never going to get old.
I even understood.
Hey, who do you have in the Super Bowl, James?
Damn it.
That's like that scene from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Hey, what's the score? 0-0. Who's winning? The Bears.
Well, on that note, because I don't have an answer, so thank you, Tim, once again for joining us. As always, you are a dream, a pleasure. We will have to see you soon, because I do believe Black Panther is on the horizon.
Yes, it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that's that.
I think so.
Yep.
Sounds good to me.
Well, thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time. I'm James Hatton.
Podcast Rob.
I am Tim Stevens.
And we'll see you all next time.
Later.
Goodbye.
I like how you turned the show into Night Vale in the last 5 seconds.